Counselor, welcome back to the show. It's amazing how far things have changed since we last spoke, and I want to break that down today. The Democrats over the weekend, sort of like, I don't know if they're just like angry or what, but it's like they are now in a full meltdown. So let's unpack a few of this. Secretary Hegseth was out talking about this so-called kill order. Let me play for you what he had to say about it. Take a look.
Did you at any time say that everybody on board should be killed?
Is anybody here from the Washington Post? I don't know where you get your sources, but they suck. Of course not. Anybody that's been in the Situation Room or they've been in the war room there, the Secretary's office, no, you don't walk in and say, kill him. It's just patently ridiculous. It's meant to create a cartoon of me and the decisions that we make and how we make them. It's ridiculous. The chairman and Admiral Bradley and everybody shot it down immediately because anybody that knows that's not how things go. There's a very defined process, specific criteria, go, no go, yes, no, lawyers, intel analysts, everything. And then after that, you simply say cleared hot or not.
So the thing that's interesting, Tim, and we talked about this last week, this isn't the first rodeo, right? I mean, military operations have been carried out this way for decades, if not centuries. And as the secretary noted there, anybody who's been part of that process at a senior level knows that, right? The secretary does. No one ever walks in and says, like, this isn't even like, it's like, did you order the code red? You're damn right I ordered it. I mean, even Hollywood wouldn't script it that way. And yet he was right. The Washington Post, it's not even that their sources suck, right? That would intimate that somebody's fed them this. But like anybody worth their salt would have bounced it off of someone like you or anybody, just said, does that sound right?
Well, and that's part of the problem is that they did bounce it off. Apparently, they did bounce it off a few people, but they bounced it off people that wanted it to be true. And I think that's the problem that we see far too often is that people who want things to be true for their own political reasons, they'll ignore, the realities. You have all these retired generals who went on, MS Now and all these other places talking about how terrible this is. And they just separated in their brain all their memory of like, how does this thing actually happen? But it made no sense.
But that's the point, is that the idea that the secretary would walk in and say, kill everyone, right? If that happened, if that was true, as he noted, in those rooms, the tank or whatever else, there's, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 people, whatever. And everyone would be like, wow, okay. But
no, they wouldn't. The chairman would have reached over and said, hey, sir, you can't say that. Yeah, the chairman would have grabbed them. Yeah, one of the lawyers would have grabbed them. There have been any number of people who would have said, oh, time out.
But also, like, you would have destroyed the boat. Like, you don't go after. It wasn't like there's targets on a battlefield. Like, you're running out and saying, get that guy and get that guy. You're either in the boat or you're out of the boat. And that's. Yeah. So if you wanted to, you would just say destroy that boat, right? When he says it's a go or no go, the operations either go, destroy the boat, or no Correct. Go. Not going after individuals like they're out there swimming across a ravine.
Correct. I mean, based on the operational situation that you have there of a boat out in the middle of the ocean, if you throw a rocket at it, chances are, I mean, the expectation is that everybody's going to die, even if they don't die in the first strike. Yeah. Even if they don't do a second strike, I mean, I remember, clearly when I was on a ship, they have the survivability chart of what's the expectation of a man in the water. And it's got time and it's got temperature. And so at the cold temperatures, they only last for a few minutes. And as the temperature gets warmer, it goes up and up and up, and then it flatlines because that's when the sharks attack.
Not to be, I mean, just to be blunt, yeah. Or you just stop being able to
You're
swim.
in morbid chart. Have you ever seen it up on the bridge of the ship? They even have a little picture of a shark on it. It's very morbid.
Okay, I'll take next time I'm on board. I'll take a look. The funny thing is, a lot of the conversation this weekend talked about the video and what it showed and what it didn't and what someone's interpretation of it. So number one, and from what I understand, it's still classified.
Yes.
Should for the sake of understanding, should it be released?
That's a decision that they have to make, because you have to always balance the interest of transparency versus the interest of operational security. And so, they have previously released, the very short clips that have certain redactions on them, for a specific purpose. But once you start to get into the longer, videos, I think that it could potentially reveal other things. So, that's something that they're certainly going to be looking at to make a decision. And I can't tell you right now what the right answer is, because ultimately, the idea of things just being declassified and put out there because the Washington Post decides to write an irresponsible story, that's not the standard. So, we can't just, declassify things every time some journalist decides to abandon their standards.
All right, guys, right now, Beam is giving my listeners the ultimate Patriot discount, 40% off. If you've been wondering how I sleep so well at night, Beam's Dream Powder is the answer. Go to shopbeam.com, use code SPICER at checkout, shopbeam.com/SPICER, all natural ingredients, reishi, melatonin, L-theanine, magnesium. You're going to love it. Amazing flavor. Shopbeam.com/SPICER, use code SPICER. You brought up the Washington Post. Secretary Hegseth mentioned the Washington Post as well. Knowing what we know now, right, in terms of that original story that says Secretary Hegseth ordered people to be killed, we now know from multiple sources that didn't happen and it wasn't true. Do they owe him an apology?
I think morally, I think that they do. Legally, or should they do a retraction? I believe that they should, because they did defame him. Is there likely going to be litigation over this? Probably not. But I think that morally, if they want to maintain their credibility whatsoever, when journalists make a mistake, they should own up to it and say, "Hey, I published something that wasn't true. I had a source that told me this, but since we fully vetted it, now we know that's not true. So we're not going to stick with that story." So I think they should, at a minimum, print a retraction. I know that Sean Parnell has asked them to.
Oh, he has.
And I haven't seen it yet. So,
you've handled. You mentioned they defamed him, right? But under the standard of New York Times versus Sullivan, Pete Hegseth is a public person.
Correct.
He's a government official. So
Correct.
You would have to prove malice, right? If you wanted to sue them.
Correct. Yeah. The standard is actual malice, meaning that they did it for the purpose of hurting them, but they also did it with either knowledge or reckless disregard of the truth. So they had to either know that they were printing something false, which is not the same if you're defaming a private individual, or with reckless disregard for the truth that, they should have known, but they just chose to run forward anyway and ignore every single warning sign. And I think, could you potentially make a case for it? Yes. Did it certainly hurt his reputation? Yeah, at least temporarily, yes. I mean, I think now that everybody sees the truth, there's probably still a small percentage of people that think that he committed a war crime, as they tried to tar him with. But I think that anybody who's being honest about it, recognizes that that's a dead issue at this point. That New York Times, V. Sullivan, that standard really has saved a lot of journalists from accountability for some really poor stories.
I can speak to that personally. I mean, the bottom line is, I want people to make sure they understood what you just said, because you literally have to prove that journalist intended to harm you. And by the way, when I've had these conversations with my lawyers, they'll say you then have to prove the harm, right? In other words, you lied about Sean Spicer or Pete Hegseth. Sure. And now tell me what the exact damage was. So did you not get a speech? Did you have a contract revoked? Because you have to prove that you suffered a damage because it's insane how ridiculous it is. And you're right. These journalists, I joke a lot of times, and I don't mean to demean meteorologists or weather people, but the weather guy gets out there and says, it'll be sunny and 85 tomorrow, and it's not, then they just wake up the next day and keep moving forward. No one ever gets on air and says, hey, yesterday I said it was going to rain, but it didn't. I think journalists are the same way. They kind of keep going forward. They, in some cases, even get awards for it, and no one ever actually holds them accountable. And that's part of the problem right now.
Correct. And, to be clear, There is something called defamation per se, where you don't have to prove damages. And here they accused him of crime. So you could definitely sue even without the damages. But the problem is we could spend a whole bunch of time, a whole bunch of money on litigation, and at the end get a judgment saying, yes, they defamed him, but since there's no serious damages, they owe him $1.
Yeah. That's crazy. I want to get back to like kind of where the Dem narrative is going though, because you talked about like war crimes and whatever. This is Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts. He was out over the weekend and he now is shifting a little to what the president is guilty of. Take a look.
I mean, look, the president of the United States and his secretary of defense are conducting murder on the high seas. They're committing murder, and Americans should care. Like, look, none of us like drug traffickers. But we have laws that say that drug traffickers don't get summarily executed. And if it's happening off the coast of America with people that we don't know, just give it time before Donald Trump starts doing this same kind of thing to people we do know right here at home. It matters if the president of the United States breaks the law.
All right, so Tim, before we get to the exact law, I want to work backwards in his. I don't even know how to describe that. But let's work backwards. He says it's not going to take long before it comes to our own shores. So a drug dealer is in the United States. Could he order a law enforcement agency to kill that person on U.S. soil?
No.
Right. Okay. So when he says that, he's not only lying, he's truly spreading fear and misinformation.
Correct.
Right. So let's move backwards. He said he's committing murder on the high seas.
So this actually, I find it interesting, the rhetoric that they've been putting out over the past, several days about this, because when you combine this with, for example, the Seditious Six video, now they're defining exactly what they think the unlawful orders are that they want people to disobey. But setting that aside, there is a difference of opinion among people as to whether you're allowed, to do these strikes at sea. And is it possible that at some point in time they convince some judge, that these are unlawful? It's possible. But as of right now, they are presumed to be lawful. And everything that I've seen, they are lawful. You have multiple frameworks under which you can look at this. You could look at it under a something called a non-international armed conflict, NIAC, which is under international law, where you are in a struggle with a non-state actor, whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the cartels, and there are specific rules of engagement that allow for that. One thing that a lot of people forget, we have treated drug trafficking for years, for decades, as a purely law enforcement function. And the reality is there are certain things that can fall into either category. They can be a military issue or they can be a law enforcement issue. We could have sent the FBI into Afghanistan without the military to see if they could just go arrest bin Laden and bring him back here to trial. It wouldn't have worked very well. But you have those options. You could, treat things as a law enforcement. But because you choose to treat it as a law enforcement issue for so many years, that doesn't mean that it has legally become a exclusively law enforcement issue. It can also be a military issue. So you have the non-international armed conflict framework. You also have the inherent right of self-defense, which is in the UN Charter. You have an organization that is specifically and intentionally shipping poison to our country with the intention of undermining our society and killing Americans. Okay? If that was anything else, if we were talking about explosives, if these were boatloads of Al-Qaeda explosives, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But because it's, drugs, they're kind of sitting there, well, some Americans like that. Some members of Congress probably, have used it themselves, maybe still do. It's one of those things where it's a little bit more sticky. But if you look at it legally, they're shipping poison to our country to undermine our society and to kill Americans.
And
that
that
makes
was
them a wild card.
that was sort of the interesting thing about some of the Democrats' defense of this week. I mean, defense of like the drug dealers, where they were like, "It's not the fentanyl; it's only cocaine." And I'm like, okay, like to your point, what do you guys have? Like, are you getting a cut of this? Like, I was sort of appalled by how they were sort of trying to sympathize with these folks. But the thing that was interesting is one of the members of Congress was out there saying, maybe we should stop the boat, interdict it, get the individuals, bring them on shore and put them to trial. And I was like, okay, but if you really want to, I mean, I know this is sort of outside both of our lanes, but just from a purely strategic standpoint, killing these boats makes it very clear if you're a narco terrorist, I'm going to die if I do this, right? And all the product will be destroyed, etc. If you said, hey, you're probably going to get arrested and then you'll go hang out in a jail in Miami and go to trial in 10 years and you might even be able to get off on a technicality, I don't know that that's as much of a deterrent.
Well, that's the thing, is that for years, for decades, that's exactly what we have done. And so we have the data to back that up. We have done that repeatedly. The Coast Guard has done a phenomenal job of interdicting these boats, arresting people, bringing them back here, putting them on trial. And guess what? It hasn't slowed it down at all.
Yeah.
It just hasn't.
Well, look, Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, was on Meet the Press. I want to play you because it's like he gets it. He's one of these guys, and exactly let me play everyone what he had to say, or a little bit of it.
They were not incapacitated. They were not in the water, surviving only because they had a life jacket or hanging to a plank of wood. They were sitting on that boat. They were clearly moving around on it. That is in contrast, for instance, to another strike that Secretary Hegseth described just yesterday in October, in which you had 2 survivors who were in that state. They were essentially just dog paddling in the water. And what happened on that strike? A U.S. vessel went and picked those survivors up and took them back to their home country. That's just an example of how our military makes these decisions based on the facts and circumstances of each particular case, consistent with laws and with the directive you just stated.
I hear you saying they weren't incapacitated, and yet Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington, the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, saw this very differently. He saw that video. He said, quote, "It looks like 2 classically shipwrecked people." Other lawmakers who saw the video said the 2 men appeared to raise their arms, potentially to signal that they were trying to surrender. Senator, why did Admiral Bradley interpret those actions as anything other than these 2 men trying to seek help and survive?
Well, again, they were sitting or standing on top of a capsized boat. They weren't floating helplessly in the water. And Kristen, I don't think it matters all that much what they were trying to do. It looked at one point like they were trying to flip the boat back over, presumably to rescue its cargo and continue their mission.
Or to stay afloat,
maybe they were signaling to other airplanes or drug cartel boats because they're in waters that are just off drug cartel areas. At one point, the guy takes off his T-shirt.
All right, so Tim, a lot to break down here, but I can't. Kristen Welker sounds like she's like, but they were just good boys. I mean, they were out for a drive, and suddenly these people started shooting at them. Don't you think? I mean, I'm amazed. It's not just the Democrats; it's the media who are literally sympathizing with people trying to bring drugs into the country.
It's crazy, and this video, as we've seen from the reactions on both sides, it's kind of a Rorschach test where anybody who looks at it can probably see whatever they want to see. If you want it to be murder, if you've walked into that, viewing expecting it to be murder, then you'll see what will confirm your bias. If you walk into it thinking, okay, well, maybe this was a lawful target, let's see what the Admiral saw, then it's going to confirm that too. And so for her to then just take the position of, well, the Democrats described it this way, and so therefore it must be that way, and so why would you do this? I think that's a little bit of a problem in and of itself.
Adam Smith, she's quoting him. He's the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. He says that they were shipwrecked, like this is Gilligan's Island, and the minnow has gone ashore, and Gilligan and the skipper are helping everybody disembark. I mean, right. I am blown away. It's sort of like, I think back to immigration, where I was like, these guys are defending people kind of coming into our country legally, and they have and now here they are again, taking the sides of narco terrorists. Like, they were shipwrecked, like as if like they were still on a boat that had drugs.
They chose that word specifically because that is the word within the department's law of war manual. They chose, I don't think that he would have come up with the word shipwrecked on his own. It's not like he looks at this and says, oh, that's Gilligan's Island. That is a legal term that if you designate them as shipwrecked, then you can try to argue that it's an unlawful second strike. So,
okay. So that's why they're doing this.
Yeah. He's using a very specific legal term.
So Tammy Duckworth, who has served in the military, had some harsh words as well. Let me play you for what she had to say.
They've not been authorized to be at war. And by the way, the individuals in that boat were not even aimed at the United States. So everything that they've done has been illegal. It's illegal under international law. It's illegal under the Geneva Convention. And it certainly is even illegal under domestic law. It was essentially murder with that double tap strike.
All right. So Tim, let's go. I mean, that's not mincing words. It's illegal under international, illegal under domestic, murder. Those are serious charges as well. Is she intentionally choosing those words because of some way that she's trying to nuance this, or is she just trying to gaslight everybody?
No, I mean, she is using those words specifically to try to say that this is unlawful and therefore people should, disobey those unlawful orders and not do any more of these strikes. But, ultimately, yes, she did serve in the Army, but she is a politician. Yeah. And she is towing the party line there. And, that's what you have here is you have people on both sides, whether they've seen the video or not, they are repeating these talking points. And ultimately, I don't think this is even about, the narco terrorists, to them. It's nobody feels bad for some dead drug traffickers. Nobody feels bad for them. But if you can paint them in a certain way, then you can hurt your political opponent. And I think that's really what's going on here.
But it's even getting worse than that. Some Democrats, like this guy, he's a California congressman, John Garamendi. And this is where, I feel like they just keep throwing mud at the wall and seeing what sticks. But this is what he had to say that I thought this was fascinating, because they're now almost like shifting to see if they've got a new argument. Take a listen to how he framed it.
There's no public information that these boats are, in fact, carrying drugs. You can see some packages in the boat, some, I don't know, maybe they're suitcases for all we know.
So there's no public. I mean, this could be DHL or UPS just shipping packages for Amazon for all we know with these suitcases, right?
No public information because intelligence by its very nature is classified. No public information, although the department has made very clear that these were people that were known narco terrorists with a boat filled with cocaine. He could sit there and say there's no public information that it was actually drugs, and yet his colleagues are sitting there saying, well, this is just cocaine, it's not fentanyl. This is the mental gymnastics. And one thing to remember here, members of Congress, they are a special class of U.S. citizens, because under the speech and debate clause of the Constitution, they are the one class that is completely immune from any type of defamation suit. They are constitutionally allowed to get on there and lie.
It's unbelievable. By the way, you mentioned the Seditious Six, those Democrats who did the video. One of them, Mark Kelly. Last time you and I spoke, we talked about him. But here's the interesting thing about Mark Kelly. He has sort of now shifted how he is looking at this. I want to show you this little compilation that shows you how his sleight of hand has changed. Take a look.
That now we have members of the United States military that have been put in an impossible situation because they're given, in the case of what we've seen here over the last couple of days, clearly unlawful, illegal orders. But I'm not going to prejudge this. I want to see the video. I want to see an investigation. I also think the legal analysis for why this entire operation is above board, that should be released as well.
So you notice that first on December, whatever that was, 2nd, it's completely illegal. We're putting military members in a bad place. 5 days later, he says, I'd like to see the video and read the analysis. It's almost like the facts caught up with him.
Correct. Yeah, that first video was based on believing the Washington Post story. And then the second video was after that narrative crumbled. So yeah, I mean and this is why nobody should go out there and make broad pronouncements of guilt based on media stories that are based solely on the say-so of anonymous sources.
Yeah. Do you think that I was trying to figure out if it's too much of a stretch to connect the dots. Mark Kelly puts out this Seditious Six video urging military members to be aware of illegal orders that they have not been ordered. And then suddenly, and he goes out and he talks about the illegal order, right? On December 2nd, that first video we just saw, i.e. kind of now trying to connect his video to this. It's illegal. See, I knew what I was talking about. Then suddenly the facts come out. There's actual video. Right. You have Admiral Bradley testifying. And suddenly I think it was almost like he went, oh my God, I better walk this back because, and this is again, I want you to tell me, is it just that the facts are coming out, or is it suddenly this potential of him being recalled to active duty and prosecuted under the UCMJ is maybe kind of coming to light? And he's going, I better be careful about what I say now.
No, because I don't think he's been very careful about that. Yeah, I think that on some level he probably wants it because it'll help him, to run for president. But what I saw there is the first clip there was actually fascinating to me because in the Seditious Six video, he's just talking about duty to disobey unlawful orders. And as we've talked about before, it has to be manifestly unlawful orders, not just unlawful orders. And then in that first clip you just played, he actually did get the standard right. Clearly unlawful orders. And what was missing there is to say if the Washington Post story is to be believed. Because here's the thing. If Pete Hegseth actually had given the kill them all orders, no quarter. No quarter is under law of armed conflict a patently, manifestly unlawful order. Okay, so if he had given that, then yes, he can sit there and say, hey, I'm vindicated. I'm right. We're putting these service members in the position where they have a clearly unlawful order. But then the facts caught up. And that's why I think he could have done far better if he said, look, we don't know whether this Post story is correct or not, but if it is true, this is a good example of what I meant. And in fact, he could have largely cleaned up the Seditious Six video right there and said, this is a good example of what I meant, that if you have a clearly unlawful order.
Yeah, this is it was a missed opportunity by him. And again, maybe I'm overthinking all of this, but between the Washington Post story, their coverage of Secretary Hegseth, their coverage of Mark Kelly, I'm wondering if some of this is like some of these folks in the media trying to take it out on the Department of War because of these new regulations about how they have to behave if they want to come into the Pentagon. This is sort of like payback.
That would presume that they were being more fair before the regulations came out. I think, look, the Democrats didn't want Donald Trump to be president. They did not want Pete Hegseth to be the secretary. They all voted against him. And everything that you've seen since then, from the media has been just about how do we try and get rid of him? How do we get him out? They have this fixation with trying to get Pete Hegseth out of office and remove him. And I think a lot of that is because of the changes that he's making. They want, some of these changes that he's made to be rolled back, go back to DEI, go back to all this, trans stuff and all that. But more importantly, if they can hurt him and if they can disgrace him and pull him out of office under, some claims of war crimes, then that's something they can use to hurt the president.
Yeah.
And I think that here also, they made a big deal. We kind of forget about it now, but if you look back during the confirmation process where they took excerpts from his book and they, kind of manipulated them around and did some, twisted logic to try to say he wants to bring back war crimes. He wants to loosen the rules so that people can commit war crimes. That was one of his criticisms of even bringing me in. Oh, he's bringing in this guy who's defended war criminals. And so, Tim and Pete have this secret plan to, unleash unbridled war crimes. And so when they see something that can, fit and, fulfill the prophecy that they claimed in the beginning, I think that's really what they want.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that they're like making us stronger, making us more lethal, making us more of a deterrent to our enemies is something that you would think is not like partisan or whatever. It's something that people should want. Like we should want to be feared. We should want to have the most lethal, ready, capable force, not a bunch of people who sit around talking about their feelings.
Correct.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.